You think being calm is a strength. It isn't always. Sometimes, what looks like maturity is just anger that never got permission to exist, and that changes you in ways you don't notice. When you were a child, anger was supposed to be a signal that something felt unfair, a signal that a boundary had been crossed, a signal that your needs mattered. But for some people, anger was treated like a threat. The moment it appeared, it was shut down. Don't talk back. Stop being dramatic. Good children don't act like that. So you learned something early. Not that anger was dangerous, that your anger was. And once that lesson settles in, it doesn't stay in childhood. It follows you everywhere. You become the person who rarely argues, the person who says it's fine when it isn't, the person who understands everyone else's perspective before considering your own. People often praise this. They call you patient, easygoing, emotionally intelligent, but inside, something feels off. You struggle to know what you actually want. You feel exhausted after simple interactions. You carry resentment toward people who never intended to hurt you. And you don't know why. Because the problem isn't that you don't get angry. The problem is that you stopped listening to anger entirely. Most people think suppressed anger disappears. It doesn't. Emotions don't vanish because they're inconvenient. They just change shape. The anger you weren't allowed to express becomes guilt. It becomes anxiety. It becomes people-pleasing. It becomes chronic self-doubt. Instead of saying, "That was unfair," you ask, "Am I being unreasonable?" Instead of saying, "I don't like this," you ask, "What if they get upset?" Instead of defending yourself, you investigate yourself constantly, and that creates a strange imbalance. You become highly skilled at managing other people's emotions while becoming disconnected from your own. The hidden trap is that this behavior often gets rewarded. Teachers like it, parents like it, friends like it, employers like it. Cooperative, low maintenance. You learn that approval comes from minimizing yourself. And every reward reinforces the same lesson. Your value comes from your compliance, not your honesty, not your boundaries, not your needs, your compliance. That's where the system becomes dangerous. Because anger has a psychological purpose. It protects territory, not physical territory, personal territory, your time, your energy, your dignity, your limits. Without healthy anger, those borders become invisible, and invisible borders get crossed. Repeatedly, you tolerate behavior that bothers you. You stay silent during moments that deserve a response. Then resentment starts accumulating. Quietly, resentment is often misunderstood. People think it comes from selfishness. It usually comes from self-abandonment. Every time you betray your own feelings to keep peace, resentment keeps score. Not because you're cruel, because some part of you knows what happened. Some part of you knows you deserved a voice. So the anger doesn't disappear. It just moves underground. And underground emotions become harder to understand. Not because conflict is dangerous, because conflict feels morally wrong. They don't experience disagreement as disagreement. They experience it as risk. Risk of rejection, risk of abandonment, risk of becoming the bad person. The strange part is that they often attract people who benefit from this. Not always intentionally, but predictably. People who take more than they give. People who assume endless patience. People who become comfortable crossing lines that were never clearly drawn. Because when you never show anger, others rarely discover where your limits are. And limits that remain invisible rarely get respected. Over time, something else happens. You lose trust in yourself. Not because you lack intelligence, because anger provides information. It tells you when something matters, when something hurts, when something feels wrong. When that signal gets ignored for years, decision-making becomes difficult. You second-guess everything. You search for external validation. You ask everyone what they think. Because you stop treating your own emotional responses as valid evidence. The deeper truth is that anger was never the real problem. Uncontrolled anger can be destructive, but absent anger creates its own destruction. One explodes outward, and society tends to notice only one of them. That's why so many people spend years trying to become even calmer, even nicer, even more understanding, while their real problem is the opposite. They already understand too much. They already accommodate too much. They already make room for everyone except themselves. At a higher level, this isn't really about anger. It's about permission. Who taught you which emotions were acceptable? Who decided which parts of you deserved expression? Because many people weren't taught emotional regulation. They were taught emotional elimination. Those are not the same thing. Regulation says the emotion can stay. Elimination says the emotion itself is wrong. One creates psychological flexibility. The other creates psychological fragmentation. You end up divided against yourself. Half of you experiences reality. The other half immediately edits it. And eventually, you start mistaking self-suppression for self-control. That realization changes everything. Because the goal was never to become someone who never gets angry. The goal was to become someone who can hear anger without becoming controlled by it. Someone who can recognize a violated boundary. Someone who can acknowledge unfairness. someone who can protect what matters, without shame, without apology, without believing it makes them a bad person. The irony is that the people who were never allowed to be angry often become experts at maintaining peace. But peace maintained through self-erasure isn't peace. It's silence. And silence has a cost. Years pass, opportunities disappear, relationships become unbalanced, identity becomes blurry. Not because you lack strength, because your strength was pointed in the wrong direction. You became incredibly good at carrying discomfort, instead of understanding what the discomfort was trying to tell you. And that may be the hardest truth of all. The problem isn't that you were too emotional. The problem is that you learned to distrust one of your most important emotions. Because anger was never the enemy. The enemy was the belief that your feelings needed permission to exist. And once you believe that, you spend your life asking for access to a voice that was already yours.